You wrote and directed Farming, based on your own childhood. Tell me about the movie.
Well, farming was a term that was used by British social workers to describe a phenomenon that occurred in Britain after the Second World War, whereby the Nigerian immigrants coming to Britain would foster or farm their children out to white working class families. We're talking thousands of Nigerian children all over Britain, in order so that they could work and study. And the idea was that once they'd accomplished what they set out to do, graduated, saved enough money, they would then collect their children and return to their native homes. That practice became known as farming. And I was farmed at the age of 6 weeks old to a white couple in the southeast of England, about an hour and a half outside of London. The film, with the same title, follows my journey under that process.
This was unique to Great Britain?
It was. It's peculiar only to Britain and peculiar to only the Nigerian immigrants, because at the time Britain was going through an economic recession, and it called upon its colonies, the West Indies, India and Africa, to come and help rebuild it. So it was kind of like an expedient labor force.
So how old were you when you were taken to this white couple?
6 weeks old.
And how old were you when you left?
16. You can imagine at 6 weeks old, my white foster family were my family. My two siblings were with me, and within the house there were another about 7 or 8 other Nigerian children from other families. So we all considered ourselves as a family, and our foster families as our parents. And I just grew up there, as you would in Britain during the 70s. The big difference, of course, being the area where we were placed, which was a town called Tilbury Town, was notoriously racist, and they'd never been exposed to black children or black people at all. So we were the first blacks to be, placed in that environment. So it was a very racist, right-wing town.
Why did you choose to direct it?
Well, it was a story that, I'd amassed a certain amount of success as an actor in my career in Hollywood, but it was at the point where I was most successful, but I was most unfulfilled. And when I looked at that, it was because there was something that was nagging me, and it was a part of my past, the traumas that I suffered under this practice called farming that I hadn't really dealt with. So I began to write the screenplay, literally just to sleep at night. And by the end of 2 weeks, I had a 500-page manuscript, which I then adapted into a screenplay.
Forgive my ignorance, but how come so little of the world knew about this?
Well, because, I surmise because a lot of the Nigerian immigrants would target white working class families that were below the radar. So it would go unnoticed, and it was, easier to, facilitate because there weren't checks and balances. So that's one of the reasons I probably think that it didn't come to, wide notice. And obviously as well, in certain regards, it indicted the system. So I'm sure they didn't really want that to be known.
Now, you couldn't play yourself as a 6-week-old, so you play the father in the movie, right?
Yeah, I played my biological father, which was a decision the producers thought would be a good idea. It wasn't the intent going in. So it was a very surreal experience, because it was the first time I actually stood metaphorically and literally in his shoes and was looking at myself from his point of view, but at the same time being empathetic to him. So it was cathartic, surreal, emotional, and I saw things that, I could only see about myself from that perspective.
Was it therapeutic for you?
Very.
Because you had to live with this a long time.
Yeah, and in directing it, I had to relive it in trying to impart to the actors, whether it's Kate Beckinsale or Damson Idris, who plays the adolescent version of me, what I was feeling at particular time. So it was very cathartic and, sometimes emotionally challenging, but while you're directing, you just have to keep that director's hat on.
And do you enjoy this aspect as much as you do acting?
I do, from a creative point of view, it gives you control of your own creative destiny. I got to write characters, you know, the narrative as well. And then I enjoyed, you know, working with the heads of the department, whether it's my production designers, the costume, hair and makeup, because all of them, they come together to, you know, bring my vision to fruition. So I liked it a lot. And I had to really exercise a lot of other creative muscles as opposed to just working as an actor. And I worked as an actor in it as well.
But do you intend to do more?
I do, yeah.
People in farming in the movie, are they still alive?
Yes. I mean, as I said, you know, the story depicts a phenomenon that spread across thousands of Nigerian children. So they are still alive. The children that actually were within my foster family, they're alive and spread out. And some of the parents, the Nigerian parents, never actually returned for them. So my foster family actually adopted them as their own children. So they're still very much alive, yeah.
How about the truck driver and his wife?
No, that was my mother and father, and they passed in 2006.
Did you call them mom and dad?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Do the other Nigerian children living at the house do the same?
We all did. We all regarded them as mom and dad. You know, some of us were there longer or shorter. But
was it hard to go back to your real mom and dad?
It was very difficult because I'd been formed, and so when they came into my life, it was really offensive to me that somebody would try to impose a parenthood, certainly as I was a young, struggling adolescent. Obviously now as an adult, we've reconciled our relationships and I've been able to embrace both parents and both cultures. But that was a difficult process as a young adolescent, yeah.
Did everybody in England know about farming?
No, it's a largely unknown phenomenon because of some of the reasons I mentioned, you know, it going below the radar. So it's very much illuminating it for the British public as well.
Now you come back to Nigeria as a 16-year-old, right?
My first connection with Nigeria was as an 8-year-old. I came home from school one day and I saw an African couple in the living room, and I was told I was going shopping and then ended up in Lagos, Nigeria. And you can imagine having grown up with my white foster parents in an all-white area that was still hostile from 6 weeks old, then being thrust into you know, an African culture that was very foreign, the heat, the smell, the food, and the language. And I was also considered a foreigner there, and it was very traumatic.
Yeah, didn't know what you were.
No, didn't, or where I was.
This, I read it, it's hard to believe. You joined a skinhead gang in the 80s. Skinhead, a white gang?
Yeah.
How did they let you in?
Well, as I said, living in England at the time, in the 70s, in the area where I was, you know, living in my house, it was a breeding ground for self-hatred, really, because racial slurs and epithets were used in the house. They were commonly shown on the BBC, you know, so it was common to call young black children coon, wogs, and sambos. Out on the streets, I was constantly subject to racist attacks, had dogs set upon me, bricks thrown, just trying to get to school. So that was the kind of environment I grew up in. My father, foster father, who was a truck driver, long distance, always away from home, said, this is how it's going to be for you. If you go out there and fight them, or I'll beat you. That was the ultimatum he gave me. And he pushed me out the door at 9 years old, and I had to go and fight 3 and 4 boys at a time. What in fact happened is a part of my childhood died that day. But what happened was I began to get a reputation for being able to take a beating and give one back, which, you know, got me the notice of these skinheads that were attacking me. And, you know, at first it was a form of amusement, this black kid that, you know, was defending himself. But then I began to get proficient at it and became an ally in the sense that when they would fight rival gangs, I was a useful tool.
Wow. You would think with all of this, you would hardly become a successful actor in the United States. How did that happen?
Well, there's a huge leap. Once my activities there escalated to the point where it was bringing undue attention onto my foster mother, she called my Nigerian parents back in to take me away because she didn't want to lose the other Nigerian children. And they commenced with what they called a cleanup program, put me with another family, that lived in a posh area, which was manicured lawns and sprinklers, very different, and put a structure around me that enabled me to study. Social workers, tutors, everything. And I actually, against the odds, got a bachelor's and a master's degree in law.
Wow.
And it was whilst I was doing that, I had a part-time job working in a men's fashion store. And one day a photographer came in and asked, they used to come in and use the clothes for photo shoots, and I had to wear them as part of the uniform. And she asked me, would I take pictures, in the clothes? And I asked her, are you going to pay me? And she paid me more than I was earning for the weekend job. So that became my new vocation. And I traveled all over Europe and eventually to America. And it was my model agent that actually sent me on my first audition, which was Mike Fenton. He was casting for a movie called Congo in 1994. I went in, read, and I got the part. And that began a whole new chapter of my life. But it was, once I met acting, it was funny because I realized that the sum total of my life, the tough upbringing and the education, the focus and the analytical skills of law, all added up to this vocation.
Never miss a beat. Subscribe to Larry King now and watch new episodes every day.